Hello and welcome to another edition of the Lean Catalyst, Strategies and Tactics for the Transformational CEO. My name is Damon Baker, and in a moment I'm going to introduce today's esteemed guest. In this dynamic monthly series, what we talk about is we bring together like-minded CEOs and leaders who successfully led their organizations through lean transformations using lean principles, lean thinking to drive results. And it's through these captivating conversations that we're going to dive into their achievements, uncover the strategies and insights and wisdom that they have found successful when propelling their organizations forward. Each series is going to feature an in-depth interview with a distinguished CEO who's demonstrated extraordinary leadership principles while leveraging lean. And it's a great opportunity for all of us to experience the strategies that they've used, gain some valuable knowledge that we can apply in our own leadership journeys. So without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's guest, Dave Banyard. Hello, Dave.
Hey, Damon. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. Thanks for joining. So Dave is the president and CEO of MasterBrand Inc. And in a moment, he'll share a little bit about what MasterBrand is and does. And before assuming this role, he actually served as, from 2019 to 2022, he was part of Fortune Brands. So MasterBrand spun out of Fortune Brands, which is a larger publicly traded consumer products company in the building space. And he came to Fortune Brands from Myers Industries, which is actually a manufacturer of packaging, storage and safety products and specialty molding, where he led the transformation of that business as president and CEO. And prior to that, he was the group president for the fluid handling technologies division at Roper Technologies, industrial conglomerate holding company that has many different operating companies that run under their own P&L. And in that role, he led a diverse portfolio of companies that were serving a wide variety of end markets. He first began his career, however, at Danaher Corporation, and Danaher is well known and highly respected as being one of the pioneers implementing a lean business system throughout their organization. And while he was there, he had many successive leadership roles, including one of his stops at probably one of the most well-known Danaher businesses, Jacobs Vehicle Systems, which is featured in the case study Jim Womack in the book Lean Thinking, and also spent some time at Kollmorgen, based in Stockholm, Sweden, and he's completed a 11-year career in the U.S. Navy as a fighter pilot, which is pretty cool. He also has a BA in economics from Princeton and an MBA from the Virginia Darden School of Business. Does that sound about like you, Dave?
I think you covered it. Wife and 3 kids is the only thing I'd add to that.
Awesome. So can you tell the audience today, what sparked your interest in lean? So what was like that first experience that you got to lean that really solidified in your mind that this is the way you were going to lead, that you were all bought in, if you will? When did you drink the Kool-Aid?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as I look back on my career, I actually learned the concepts of lean in the Navy, and we didn't call it that. But if you think about it, I probably spent 3 or 4 years of my life on an aircraft carrier deployed overseas, and the aircraft carrier flight deck is one of the best lean factories on Earth. First of all, it's one of the most dangerous places on Earth. So, we always thought in terms of safety, quality, and quality meaning, the airplane is in good shape and can go fly, delivery. But if you go out on a flight deck on an aircraft carrier, there's no voice communication at all. And their tack time, if you want to call it that, we didn't use these terms, but they're landing and recovering an aircraft every 30 seconds with no voice communication. And so if you think about all the tools of lean, the Navy had to do that in order to make it the safe environment that it is, even though it's a very inherently dangerous place, to deliver an aircraft every 30 seconds at high speeds, a lot going on. And to do all that without voice communication, the reason you don't use voice communication is you don't want the enemy to know where you are, so people can track voice communication. So all of this is done without communication verbally, And so I came out of the Navy, and again, I didn't know that these concepts are things that I could apply into the business world, but I came out with that fundamental grounding of everything can be visual, everything can have a metric. You have to have a clear picture of what your target is and hit it every single time, and you have to have a process behind all that to make it work. So that's how I showed up at Danaher, was with that in the back of my head. And I was blessed to be able to start at a company that just really understood lean and was the foundation, if you will, at Danaher for lean. And running the factory at Jake Brake was a great learning for me. And I learned all the lessons and the tools at Danaher. And I think, if I'm honest with myself, I made every mistake in the book about how to lead through lean in my tenure there, but that helped set the stage for me, and I really got to see it in action. And for those that don't know, Jake Brake was a unionized plant. I know you've had discussions on this topic with others. I've done lean overseas, I've done lean with union, I've done lean without union. It really doesn't matter. The tools are very common sense oriented, and so that appeals to me. I think it's, as I look back and how I describe lean to my organization today and to anybody, it's the best associate engagement tool out there. You're really empowering people to do their work better, to enjoy their work more. And I find that to be tremendously rewarding when you see it in action. And so it was early, it kind of builds over time. You make a bunch of mistakes, there's a bunch of tools, and sometimes you think it's a tool that you're going to use with a blunt as a blunt instrument. Sometimes you think it's a magic wand. It's none of those. It's a great set of tools and processes to help you be better and help others be better. And I love that.
Yeah, I've heard the saying about the Navy in particular that the standards and guidelines and protocols are written in blood. Have you ever heard that saying?
Yeah,
people have died as a result of creating these, and that's why a lot of these standards that you talk about exist, because of the catastrophic risk and of life that it can bring about. So that discipline is really important.
Safety is it's a core value, and it sort of taught me early on about that, and it's remained with me, and it's always been a core value for me throughout my career.
Were you a quote unquote disciplined person before you joined the Navy, or did the Navy teach you discipline?
Being a pilot, there's a certain amount of discipline to it that if anybody flies, they know there's a lot of checklists involved. But I think flying is also very creative. You have to be able to react dynamically. I got a lot of questions when I was first transitioning to the business world about, hey, you're a military guy, you must just bark orders or follow orders, and you're very regimented. And I think my experience in the Navy was very different from that. It was a highly dynamic environment where decisions had to happen very quickly. You had a lot of freedom to, rank doesn't really have a place in the air. It doesn't matter what's on your shoulder when you're flying, it's who's leading the flight. And you have to be able to react to whatever's coming at you. And so I think discipline around things that have to have discipline, meaning you have to follow the checklist, you have to follow the procedures on a flight deck, absolutely. But you have to be able to react to change very quickly. And so that's the way I describe myself, is that I am disciplined when it comes to there's a right way to do things, but you have to be able to react to change. And that's an art. I find that in my current role as a CEO, that's really the job. You're looking for a bunch of different puzzle pieces to fit together, and you've got to react when something changes. You can't be so dogmatic that you're not flexible.
Yeah. On that thread, I may not get the terminology right, but AAR, after action review, I assume the Navy has some version of that as you went out on missions. Can you just kind of talk through that and tie that to continuous improvement, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I spent more time in the briefing and the debriefing. Of a flight is typically an hour to an hour and a half. A debrief could be 4 hours, and it's very disciplined in terms of, and it's not designed to be critical. It's designed to help whomever you're working with be better, or yourself included. And I would always start the debrief by looking at my own tape and pointing out all the, invariably you've done 100 things wrong on any given flight. It's not nitpicky. It's designed to make you better.
But you actually look at the whole play-by-play, like
you look at every aspect of the play. from start to finish. And safety is the same way. You brief safety even on flights that, you know, the slang for it is a milk run, where you're kind of just going from A to B and there's nothing really difficult in the flight. Actually, on those flights, you brief safety even to a higher extent, because those are the ones where you're feeling relaxed. You're not paying attention as much. And so there is that level of discipline is really something that the military does well.
How uncomfortable was that, like the first few times that you had to go through that? Did you naturally find that something to be positive, or were you defensive,
The brief and the debrief.
Yeah.
I think you're trained that way from day one. I mean, flight school, the Navy's the way we train as pilots in the Navy it's very much learned by doing. I mean, I'd never flown an airplane before in my life, and on my first flight, I was taking off. And then on my second flight, I was landing the airplane. So it's one of these show-do kind of training things, and then you practice. It's like any sport. It's similar to a sport. If you think about a professional athlete, they've practiced that maneuver thousands of times, and that's why they're so good at it. Same thing applies in the military. Is it training? That's what makes the U.S. military, I think, so good at what they do, is the training. So it's part of the culture you're brought up in.
So you're brought up in this culture of discipline, standards, continuous improvement, for lack of a better word. And they're not using the terminology lean, but for all intents and purposes, that's exactly what it is. Looking at how do you get better each and every time that you go out and be successful in the mission. So armed with that understanding and that experience, you leave the Navy, and what attracted you to Danaher? Like talk about that first role and how you got that opportunity, and why you thought culturally that was a fit for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of commonality in the cultures. There's a desire and a real culture around high performance and driving beyond what people think is possible. That really attracted me, and that the way they framed it, at least, it's been 20 years since I went through an interview process with Danaher, but the way they framed it for us as part of the interview process was, you can go as fast and as far as you want. It's up to you. It wasn't a very scripted path. It was a real job, but it was appealing to me. I came, sort of later in life, if you will, going through a business school program. I was one of the older people in my class, and I really wanted to get started quickly and get experience. And Danaher offered that. Plus, they're helping you with that using the tools of lean. You're learning how to be a leader with lean. And like I said, I'm pretty sure I made every mistake in the book along the way, because you have to learn. There's cultures, and every organization has this. There's the overarching culture of the organization, but then you acquire new companies, which Danaher did quite a bit of, and I participated in when I moved to Sweden, that was companies we had acquired. And so you've got to do culture change. You've got to try to bring the best out of the culture of what you've acquired, and bring the best of Danaher culture, and that's hard. And culture change is always going to be the hardest thing. As I look at my job, that's really, most of what I spend my time thinking about is, how do I keep moving the organization forward towards the culture we're aiming for? It's aspirational. I think Danaher had a lot of that already, but then every time you buy a new company, you got to almost start over again. And what's the pace? How do you convince people? How do you apply it to different, Danaher's changed their business monumentally. All the businesses I work for are no longer part of Danaher. So that change takes time and effort and leadership. And I find it a lot of fun. I've learned, like I said, I've learned a lot about how to do it over time, and it takes practice like anything else.
Yeah. So you're on this transformation journey now with MasterBrand. So for those that are listening that might not know what MasterBrand is and does, can you give us an overview of your company?
Yeah, sure. Quite simply put, we're the largest kitchen bath cabinet manufacturer in North America, and we cover pretty much every channel you can imagine with every range of products. So we make everything from a very basic cabinet that you could buy off the shelf at a large retailer like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, all the way up to a fully customized kitchen that you designed from scratch. and sold through a small dealer or designer that's in your hometown, and everything in between. We deal with very large new construction home builders, the public builders, the Lennars, the DR Hortons of the world, all the way down to, like I said, a large customer for us in the dealer world is $1 million a year, and we're almost $3 billion in revenue. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of things we do and a pretty broad product set. What I will say, and what I noticed when I first joined the company, was it is by far and away the most complex product and business that I've run. And I've been, as you highlighted earlier, I've been in a bunch of different industries, from automotive to electrification of vehicles to oil and gas to agriculture and fluid handling and packaging, you name it. I kind of consider myself to be a manufacturer at heart, not an industry expert. And this is a very, very complex business because of the fact that it's very easy to design anything, and we offer that. And so managing that complexity and managing across a pretty broad network of factories. We have over 20 factories across North America. And there's a lot of labor involved in it. It's a pretty daunting task to organize all that.
Yeah. So I'll probably jump back and forth throughout your career, so I'll apologize in advance. So you get to MasterBrand, you've got all this Danaher experience, you got the Navy experience, you had 2 CEO roles post Danaher as well, where you're implementing a lean journey in the companies that you're working with at various stages of maturity and need and so on. All of those important in terms of building out the culture. So you get to MasterBrand. What's the first 90 days look like? So how do you take stock of what the company is and what position they're in, maturity level with regards to lean culture? So what did you uncover, and how did you spend your time?
Yes, I mean, I run a similar playbook when I started a new company, which is I probably interview 50 to 60 of the senior people within the company to gauge a variety of things. What's working, what's not working, what are you worried about? Try to gauge what the culture is today. And if you do enough, it's kind of like any survey, but I do it one-on-one. I mean, I meet it with at least an hour with all these folks, and that's an investment in my time to really try to get to know the people, but also get to know what's underneath the culture. And you start hearing themes. There's always going to be a one-off in that survey, but it starts to develop some themes. And the themes that I noticed within MasterBrand when I first joined was, I heard snippets of people saying we do some lean things, but then when you go to Gemba, that didn't line up. So in other words, I would ask questions about that, and people say, oh yeah, we've used the lean tools. We started with that, 10 or 15 years ago. But then when you go to a factory, which is another thing that I do whenever I join new companies, I try to hit every location that I possibly can. Of course, I joined in right around now in 2019, and so by March or April it was COVID, so I couldn't. I had to alter that a little bit, so I didn't get to every factory, but that didn't quite line up, is what I'm driving at here. So what I was hearing from people didn't line up with what I saw in the factories, and so that sort of sparked in me, all right, we have some work to do here. The other thing that I saw was there were a lot of siloed thinking throughout the organization. This is what my department does, these are my challenges, and they didn't really have a perspective of how their challenges related to the challenges upstream or downstream of their particular function. And you get that just by asking questions about, why that, it's that powerful question, why? And so looking at that, I think, lean is the ideal tool to bring people together to problem solve. I mean, if you come down to it, the basic things, if you want to be great at lean, you have to be great at value stream mapping, and you have to be great at problem solving. If you're great at those two things, you got the gist of it. And we weren't problem solving in a cross-functional way. And we didn't fully understand the impact of what one particular group was doing on the next stage. So that's that value stream map, and then that problem solving within. And so that's really what came out for me. And it's, you could probably accuse me of, having a hammer and everything looks like a nail, since I do love lean and bringing that forward. But it is, I want to see that the organization thinks that way, and it was apparent to me that it didn't. And so that's, we started, I've heard other folks talk about strategy deployment and whether you use that right away. I think it's valuable to start there, even if your first strategy deployment initiative is to implement lean. And that's effectively what ours was. Is I knew that this business would benefit from having a comprehensive business system centered around lean and 80/20 and tools like that. And so that was our first strategy deployment initiative. It was just focused on that.
Did you have to overcome any historical heartburn or sort of mistakes with lean? And was the word lean like a 4-letter word inside the company? Was there any of that going on?
No, I think there was a general understanding of what it could do. I think what there wasn't an understanding of what was how it can really be a culture, and I think there was maybe a little bit of hubris around how good we were at it. I think it was one of those, we did that already, as opposed to, I know that lean is a journey. It's not a destination, and we started the journey. So the tools and the terms to some extent were familiar. I didn't get any pushback that this was a bad idea. It was more of, well, we've kind of already done that. Let's talk about something else. And I think now I challenge my team, or I ask my team to reflect about what's changed over the last 4 years. Whenever we get together and talk of, doing our next layer of strategy deployment, we do this, and I say, think back 4 years ago as to what you thought about these tools then, and your first value stream map and what that uncovered and how scary it looked. And now it's just kind of part of our rhythm of how we operate. And that's a great accomplishment for everybody in our organization, that's now just the way we think.
Yeah, it sounds like through your interviews and through going to Gemba and talking with folks that you uncovered a lack of alignment internally, and almost like maybe a lack of a understanding about how we need to be internally focused around customer supplier relationships internal to our organization, which is not uncommon in a lot of companies, by the way, because we sort of think our function is the end all be all. What part of that first 90 days or that first year were you going out and getting the opinion of what customers thought about MasterBrand, and what did you learn from that exercise that tied back into what you wanted to do with lean in the first 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think we have a great reputation with our customers, and it's part of that. It was a condensed 4-month, and so I didn't get enough of what I was looking for in that first 4 months, because then COVID hit. But I'd visit plants and I'd visit customers in the region of where our plants are, and so I got both. And I think that what I noticed is this industry has, I don't want to say low expectations, but I think there's a lot of things that I would challenge as the norms in the industry. And I'll give you an example of that. Wood is a very difficult material to work with, not because it's actually easy in the sense that you can make it into whatever you want. It's a nice material, and that can easily be formed into a wide variety of different things. But it's got a lot of natural defects to it, if you think about it. You may not see the defect until you've already sanded or cut the piece of wood, and then the defect presents itself. So you've already put work into it at times when you see the defects. And so there's a bit of an acceptable level in the industry in terms of good enough, and as opposed to, in the automotive industry, you were never just bare average. You had to be Six Sigma, or you were going to get a talking to from a large OEM, because of all they understand. Automotive does understand the value chain. It took them many years to have it kind of gravitate that way, but they understand that if one part of the value chain breaks down, a massive factory gets shut down because of it. I think that the cabinet industry, and in many ways the building products industry, accepts that there's defects in the world, and that's hard to overcome. So I think that sometimes it has to get worse for it to get better, and I think that over time we're aiming to be better than what the industry has been able to deliver in the past, and that's a hard thing to do, but I think it's an admirable goal for us. So it's things like that. But really, the industry talks about we call it the four basics, but it's safety, quality, delivery, and cost. I mean, that's what the industry wants, and we have to deliver that. And so I think I'd say we're as good as any other big player. We're not standing out in any way yet, and we have work to do there.
You talked earlier about this being the most complex industry business that you've ever worked in. As you reflect back on the last 4 years at MasterBrand, what have you found most challenging about implementing the MasterBrand way? That's what you guys are calling it, right? The lean business system.
Right.
What have you found most challenging, and perhaps maybe you haven't figured it out yet completely, and you still wrestle with it over the last 4-year journey?
Yeah, the most complex thing is, at least with our businesses, we're the largest, so we have scale. But in order to have scale have any value, you have to be able to use that scale in a way that drives efficiency. If you have a wide variety of different ways of making the same thing, both with your systems, in other words, what you call that thing, plus the way you manufacture that thing, it makes it very difficult to have a commonality of production in your factory. It makes it difficult to explain to customers what you're delivering to them. I'll give you an example of that. Every cabinet that has a drawer box. It's a pretty simple thing. It's a box, and it's either dovetailed or it's stapled. And dovetail's more expensive, so there tend to be in higher end products. We probably had 12 different ways of making a drawer box, and it's really just a box. And that's because we came up through acquisition. All these companies started as small companies, and everybody has their own idea about how to do it. And some of that difference may just be the machine that you're using to cut the dovetails, and so the assembly process is slightly different. But all those variations as you go across our network of plants just makes complexity in how we're able to shift an order from one factory to a different one, those kinds of things. We've been attacking that starting with tools of 80/20, but then it's in conjunction with lean tools of, we want to duplicate things that are duplicatable across a big network of plants. And that allows us to be more flexible as markets go up and down, because we are in a cyclical industry. And so you can't just keep building factories and then idle them when the market's down. You've got to be able to flex them up and down in a very controlled way. We're getting there. We've got probably 3 plants left that are not set up in a way that we can flex them up and down with the rest of the network. And that's just because those are the more complicated product lines, the highly custom plants. It's that job shop mentality. Those are harder to make into a process, but we're getting there.
If you were to estimate, and this is probably a tough question to answer, but what % of the complexity would you say is self-inflicted versus market-driven?
A lot of it. And that's not a criticism. It's a fact of, again, these companies started as a small single site brand, and it used to be that we could only manufacture that brand in that one spot because of the differences in the assembly and the construction of the box itself. Over time, if you come up with a common, what I'd call parent offering, you're able to slide customers up and down that spectrum. The customer, at the end of the day, the customer doesn't really care for the complexity. They want the design, they want the kitchen to look the way they want it. Sometimes, there's going to be some folks that want something a little more challenging. That's fine. As long as you know that, you can get them to pay for it. There really is, customers want simplicity. And that's one of the things that as we look beyond our factories, this is that sort of customer back thinking. When we hand off the finished cabinets, there's still a lot of complexity for you to get your kitchen completed. And that's our next phase of what we're working on, is how do we make the whole process easier? Because ultimately it still reflects on us. If you had a terrible installation where you were out of your kitchen for 2 months because they demoed it and they didn't put the boxes in correctly or whatever it may be, that whole experience reflects on us. And we've got to make sure that that's a delightful experience. So our vision as a company is building great experiences together. And that's not just centered around cabinets. It's around the whole process of renovating your kitchen. And that's hard to do.
Yeah, and it's also such an emotional purchase too.
Yes.
I mean, you think about the % of spend that people invest in proportion to the overall build of a house. Like oftentimes the kitchen and then when you want to add like the bathrooms and other things where cabinets will show up, it's one of the, it's the big bar on the Pareto, if you will, of spend. So there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of branding that's really important in that. And so it's not just, you're not making widgets by any stretch of the imagination.
Correct. It has some commodity elements to it, but it's very non-commodity when it comes to the whole package of what you're delivering to a consumer. And because it's a consumer item, tastes matter. Design and style matter. When I was making Jake brakes, the design mattered to the engineers at the engine company. Most people didn't know what a Jake brake was, so they know what it sounded like. That's about it.
Yeah. Do you find it an added degree of difficulty in that you have to not only market to businesses and distributors and perhaps the channel that you sell through, but you also have to be a B2C brand and building a brand around what you do?
That is a complex part of this business, and I think if you were to go back in time, we thought of our customers as the channel and not factoring in that the end user is really the person that's purchasing the product. And so that's another part of discovery when you're doing things like value stream maps. You start realizing, when you start working customer back, you start realizing who your customer really is.
Yeah.
And in our case, there are two constituents that really matter. The channel obviously matters tremendously, but ultimately it's the person that's using the product, the consumer, that matters. And so that's part of, as we've gotten more organized and simplified, we're able to spend more time focusing on that aspect of the sale.
So the lean tools, you think, revealed that inequity of where we were maybe devoting too much of our energy to not the wrong customer, but not in the right allocation?
Absolutely, it always does. And I think that my experience in lean transformations is the beginning often feels very internally focused, because it is in a lot of ways. You're fixing friction in your own house. At some point, though, if you've done things the right way, and we started with you guys, which we very much appreciate, is you do a value stream map of the whole process. And that's the vision. That's where you're trying to go. You can't bite it all off in one swing. You've got to do it in pieces. So over time, as you've gotten better at certain parts, it does feel very inwardly focused, but you've got to always resist the temptation that's it, that you're done at that point. Now, and we're at that phase, and we have been for the past year and a half, where we're reorienting a lot of the work we're doing, particularly, and that's why strategy deployment is such a great tool, because it helps the organization see that shift from the top down. Everybody's now talking about different things because we've accomplished a lot. Lean, standard work, the basics of lean are no longer part of strategy deployment for us. That rolled off this year. And that should signal something. For those of you who are out there who are thinking about trying this, that's 3 years. We've had what I call basic foundational tools still in our strategy deployment. It's the one that's closest to the center. It's critical that we get that right. We think we're at the stage now where that's become part of the daily work. We don't feel like that has to be a strategy deployment initiative. All of our strategy deployment initiatives now have started over the last year and a half, have migrated closer and closer to the customer, and that's our next transformation for the next couple of years.
Dave, what advice would you give, particularly publicly traded CEOs in a similar position that you are, that are about to embark on this lean journey? Because the payoff oftentimes isn't like instantaneous, where like all the issues that you just talked about, like complexity and culture and lack of customer focus, like the company didn't get there overnight. It was in some cases decades of oversight and not managing the business effectively. So how do you keep the shareholders and analysts and all the stakeholders at bay and insulate your team from what you're embarking on as a journey, to use your own words, that doesn't have a destination, that you just, you're continuing different innings of it, if you will, and maturing at different. So how do you balance all that, getting results, keeping shareholders happy, showing that demonstrating progress, not just giving lip service to this thing called the master brand way, but actually fulfilling all those obligations. So what advice would you give to people who are thinking about either getting started or are struggling to manage all those stakeholders?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, investors are people and they understand. Good investors do. There's going to be investors out there, and we see there's a lot of activism. There's a lot of change the game now kind of people, and sometimes they're appropriately so. But I think that really good investors, lean has been around long enough. They know that it's not a magic wand. It doesn't happen overnight. I think you got to be honest and you have to be transparent about that. On the flip side, as the leader of this, and that's a key part of it, I think any CEO that's stepping into this saying, I'm going to delegate this into my organization and let them run with it is giving it short change. You've got, at least in the initial phase, and I'll explain what I did in this regard. You have to be on the front line with your team, learning the tools, going to the debriefs of the events you're doing, participating.
Where did you learn that? But where did you learn that? You didn't come out of the womb knowing that, right? Where did you learn?
I mean, Danaher, I mean, like I said, I've learned from a lot of great leaders there. You had one on a couple of months ago, and he was there. And Dan Daniel would show up at Kaizen events and ask good questions and participate. Larry Culp did the same thing. I mean, I look back on, watching Larry Culp, and I was not, I didn't interact with Larry a lot, but I did as a very, kind of junior company president, have what I thought was outsized interactions with him because he seemed to have endless capacity. I don't know where the guy's, when he ever was at home. And so, that kind of model is, I probably don't live up to that. I have a slightly different style perhaps, but every leader does. So it's not a, pick your own style for that. But it is, the first year is really critical that you're involved so that people can see that you're there, and that's leading from the front, but also so that you can see the struggles and have some empathy for those struggles. And to me, that's a key part of it, is that if you think lean is a blunt instrument or a magic wand and you just sort of say go do, and you don't kind of get in the middle of it to really understand where the challenges are, I feel that's very hard to get a pulse for the change that's happening in your organization. So it's a grind. That's the way I describe it. It's not fun to hear, but the first year or two is a grind, and you're going to have some setbacks. You're going to go to an event where everybody's celebrating, and you're looking at it and going, yeah, we didn't really accomplish anything this week. And how you show up as a leader in those situations, and this is some of the things I've learned over time. Going back to my Navy days, we were very blunt with each other. When I was an instructor, and that was the culture. It was, this was wrong. We've got to fix this. Go do. I'm a lot softer now as partly you get older and you see what works, and partly you're maybe hanging on a little differently. The stakes are different, but I've learned to use that opportunity to instruct and to coach and teach people. Here, if we had come at this problem in this fashion, perhaps we would have come to a different solution. So what do you say we kind of think about, let's try redoing, but a different way, and instead of kind of that blunt, hey, this was a failure. So I think learning how to do that by actually doing it, I think, is a critical part of this process. So it's a commitment. That's what I would say, is you've got to commit to it. And you've got to rally your team around it, and they've got to see what's in it for them, which is hard, particularly in some areas. Most people think you start with lean on the plant floor. It is an easy place to start because everything's very tangible and visible. But there's lean that can be done in sales. There's lean that can be done in back office functions. It's not as tangible, but it's just as important.
What do you look for in a leader? So, I imagine over the last 4 years, you've had to have tough conversations at multiple levels with leaders around expectations, and modeling some of those same behaviors that you just said are key as advice for CEOs and the like. So how important is talent on the lean journey, and what do you look for in the type of leaders as you build out that master brand way inside the company? What are some of the qualities and traits that you look for in leadership?
Yeah, I mean, leadership is it's funny. We talk about what are the critical roles in our business, and plant manager. Since we have 13,000 employees, the vast majority of those 13,000 report to a plant manager. It's one of the most critical jobs we have in the company, and it's several layers below me. So I don't interact with them on a one-to-one basis all the time. So you got to really pay attention to that. And the characteristic we're looking for from all of our plant managers is leadership first. It is a leadership job, not a engineering job or a cabinets oriented job. It's a leadership job. You've got to rally a large number of people every day to accomplish something. And I kind of look at it in the same vein as in the military. You have in the U.S. military, I think has this concept really well wired, better than other militaries around the world, is that non-commissioned officer. I learned more about leadership from the chiefs that had to salute me, but I did not bark orders at them. They were teaching me how to be a leader when I was 25 years old. So it starts there, but I think establishing an understanding, a common set of a common lexicon, and you guys use that word, a common lexicon across the organization is really important, and so that all the leaders are speaking the same language. And then we try to frame it in a way that everybody can understand what it means to be a great leader in our company. And it's really three things. We use a little acronym that our ticker is MBC, so people can remember it as make the team better. And lean is all about that, if you think about it. So you don't have to tell them it's lean. You just say, make your team better, be bold. So that implies an inherent amount of risk that we are willing to let you take, right? And risk is something you're granting someone the permission to go take, as long as it's not huge risk that could take the whole company down, those kinds of things. And then champion improvement. And just with that simple acronym there, those are the things that if you do those well, you'll be successful at MasterBrand.
Yeah, and once you have that culture, I think it's probably pretty easy to see when people don't fit that culture. They stand out like a sore thumb, if you will. Would you agree?
What I'd say the common thread that I've seen, and this applies not just at MasterBrand, throughout my career, the lower you go in the organization, it's always about leadership, and leadership matters not just in terms of what you're leading them, but how you lead them. I mean, someone that's in there yelling at people all the time is not going to be effective. So are you leading with empathy and understanding and helping your team be successful, or are you yelling at people and barking orders? That's not going to work either. You'll get some short-term gain out of that. But so that's the whole make the team better piece of it. The higher up you go, what I often see is it's more around how are you setting your sights? And what I look for in my executives, the people that report to me, are we setting a vision and a plan to achieve that vision that's truly extraordinary? Are we trying to be, a world-class company? And we would all probably self-admit we're not there yet. Maybe we're tough graders and we'll never get there. I don't know, but setting the bar high is something that I see. If you have a team of people that's setting the bar high and really problem solving on how to get there, and then you have one that's sort of setting a low bar and stepping over it, that tends to become apparent pretty quickly. And if not everyone's on that same page, then it gets hard.
Yeah, I think you start to create a culture over time too, where we have no trouble like holding each other accountable in a respectful way.
That's right. But also helping each other. I mean, it's one of those, the beauty of when you start really functioning in a cross-functional way, which I've been really just astounded at how great MasterBrand has become at doing that. I have this problem, and immediately they're grabbing every function that might have an issue that's involved in that problem. And that team is self-supporting in terms of this is the goal, and everybody wants to help that person be successful. That's when you know it's working.
So as you reflect back on the last 4 years, like what in your mind is the most significant accomplishment, realizing that there's always more to do, obviously, but
I think it's just that building that base of culture. I'll give you an example of that. The first year We did value stream maps for every part of the business, order to cash. And it was a daunting task just to do that. And the results were daunting when they came out. It was one of those aha moments, I think, for everybody in the organization, but it's a little deflating when you first do it because you go, I have that much waste in my organization. And then they put the number up there that, you know, the future state should equal this amount of change, often in dollars or people or whatever it may be. And that just looks impossible. And nobody wants to put that on their, you know, on their objective that I'm going to save $100 million when, you know, that's half of our operating profit that prior year. Now, what's interesting is when we go into our planning cycle in the summer, that's just done. It's just how the team thinks, and they're no longer negotiating over, is this number good enough? It's, here's the output of the value stream map, so we're going after this. And here's the section we're going to attack in the next 12 months. It's just a part, like I said, it's part of how we operate now. And that's a fundamental change in thinking that's really allowed it's allowed me to think more broadly strategically as a leader, which is great. I spend a lot of time thinking 5 years from now, what do we need to look like? I don't have to worry as much about the day to day, and that's a huge change for this company.
Yeah. If you kind of run down the scorecard, if you will, you know, imagining I'm a potential investor, so like the last 4 years through the execution of the MasterBrand Way, what are some of the financial results that you can attribute to the shift of the culture and this adoption of the MasterBrand Way across the enterprise?
Yeah, so I point investors to our financial, if you just took the top level financial results, you know, we experienced a just unbelievable growth during COVID because everybody was remodeling their homes.
Yeah, everybody.
It was literally outsized. I mean, we're not a company, we're not an internet company, and we grew compound annual growth rate of 11% over 3 years. That's not normal for a business, building products business or a manufacturer of like us. But if you look in the middle of that, there was labor, supply chain challenges, massive disruption to our normal flow of business, both outsized growth, but massive disruption behind it, and then massive inflation coming through. But if you look at our financial results starting in 2019, they're very steady from the bottom line perspective on the margin. And it's been a steady improvement year over year, despite all that chaos that everybody knows was going on. So that's what I explain to investors is we know we're in a cyclical business and there's going to be market forces that we can't overcome. And that's just part of being in, it's like I was in oil and gas for a period of my career. And I mean, the market cycle in oil and gas is horrendous. You just have to be prepared for it. And if you build your business to be able to handle a cycle like that, and you're not gonna be perfect and you're not gonna always grow margins every year if you have a really steep down cycle. But if you're consistent, and ultimately that consistency shows up in the cash flow statement, which is what they all care about the most. If you can do that and you're in control, that's what investors like, and that's what we've been able to accomplish, and that it's meaningful if you compare us to our peers.
Yeah, I mean, lean when done well should free up cash because you're managing inventories more optimally to meet customer demand. You're taking care of capex expenditures, tend to be less because you think more with the mind versus the wallet. AR, AP. So as you think about MasterBrand, and how big of the results picture is the free cash flow part of the results?
I mean, a great example is we had supply chain chaos in 2021, and we have a global supply chain, and we intentionally invested in inventory to, so that was a decision we made, which is counter to, if you were to take the textbook out, you don't want that's waste. But we made that decision knowing that there was so much waste piling up behind it, ocean freight, as well as just, labor chaos elsewhere in the world, that we had to do that. We had to buffer our customers from that problem. So we invested in inventory up until about March of 2022, when the market started slowing down in housing products. And, it's really hard to shift gears in inventory when it's, sitting on the water. And so we had a lot of inventory last year. We've pretty much gotten, because of our ability to use the lean tools effectively, we've been able to run that inventory down significantly. Our cash flow is tremendous this year, and we didn't do that by shutting down our suppliers. We didn't go to them and say, hey, you got to take, we're going to shut you down for a month. We know that that's not the way it works, and we work with our customers that way too. I mean, a lot of the only finished goods inventory we have in the system is with home centers. They're big, they have a lot of leverage, they're very good customers, but we worked with them as well to say, here's the way we can help you burn your inventory off as well, and that's mutually beneficial for both of us. And that's all the lean tools help us do that.
Yeah, no, that's great. One of the hallmarks, I think, of a true lean leader is humility, and it gets talked about a lot, being a humble servant leader and things like this, but also being looking back and reflecting on areas of opportunity, which we talked about, the AARs. I mean, that's been like the crux of your whole career in a sense. So as you look back, whether it be with MasterBrand or your time at Danaher, Myers, Roper, what's like the one standout mistake that you made that you kind of look back on it and chuckle and sort of laugh, as to what happened? What was the story?
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I've made a bunch of mistakes. I think that probably the biggest mistake that I've made is the pace and my impatience with change. And I've learned how to temper that over time, and it manifests itself in what I'd call poor leadership. I mean, you set an expectation that's impossible, and you're not achieving your goals, and you're unhappy about it. I think that I've learned, having done this a few times now, and it's part of why I don't have any hair, and you get older and you get more wise. There's some truth to that. You understand the pace that people can accept change, and you look for markers to help you see the progress. That's another fundamental part of lean, is setting the right metrics and the interim metrics and the leading metrics, and then having the patience to be able to say, we're going to get there. It's going to take a little longer, and it requires confidence, sure, but it also it requires that you're going to have to answer some questions sometimes that maybe aren't very pleasant. If you have the confidence in your team and really building towards that, I think you can get there. So I've become a lot more patient the older I've gotten and the more experience I've gotten, and that's a good characteristic for any leader. And I look back on leaders that I've worked for all the way back through my Navy days, and the best ones were the ones that were driven. They set high expectations, but they understood how to guide you from A to B, and I've learned a lot about how to do that.
Yeah, I think early on in our careers, folks that maybe don't learn the lesson, they think everybody is the same, and there isn't situational leadership. Like, we're just going to run this fast, and we're going to turn the treadmill up, and I don't care about your physical fitness level. You all need to run at this speed. And as you get later on in your career, you recognize, you have certain individuals that maybe don't have the knowledge and skills necessary to be successful. Can they be taught? And the answer to that question oftentimes is yes. In some cases, there is an unwillingness to learn, so you deal with those individuals differently. But I think having that emotional maturity around managing people as individuals and recognizing, like, how do I match the pace with the situation that I'm in? I can't just go in and set fire at every organization that I start in and expect everybody to run at the same pace that I am, for obvious reasons.
And I think the other key part of what you're talking about there is that there is an aspect to this job, or any leadership job, of making the determination of, can somebody get there? And you have to, I think you and Dan talked about this, that, there's some people that are just going to resist, and you got to give them a chance. You got to, and I think that's one area where I'd say I'm fungible from a patient standpoint. I'll give people an opportunity, but there's got to be a movement at some point. And then you have to admit, if you don't have the right leader helping you with this, if you don't, that's going to hold you back. And so there is an aspect to this. It's not all butterflies and rainbows. There's some hard decisions you have to make about. And I always look for, you described it well there. I always look for that ability to learn, and that learning mindset is a critical part of doing this, because I learn every time I see a different event, and we do 5+ events a week. at MasterBrand, I learned something. And I'm also very, back from my military days where we debriefed for 4 hours after a 1 hour flight, I'm very self-reflective of how can I take on board what I'm learning and change. And if you have people in your organization that are not willing to do that, and you're trying to do this, you're going to run into some roadblocks, and you probably need to make some changes. And sometimes those changes are harder. I mean, that people have been part of the company for a long time. It's never easy.
Yeah, and I think when you have the right NBC culture, those decisions happen oftentimes before you even recognize them. Like the culture doesn't allow those types of people to even come on board, or last very long because they're holding each other accountable.
That's right. Yeah. Whenever you're bringing somebody new in, I look for a lot of the things that I know are going to make that person successful with us. And if they're not there, they might have the best resume on earth, but it doesn't matter. And not every company, there are a wide variety of cultures out there in the business world. So what works at one company doesn't necessarily work at another.
So I got some questions here from the audience. You ready to answer some?
Yeah, let's dive in.
So what is your plan going forward to continue to implement lean across the vast MasterBrand network?
Yeah, so it's continuing. Obviously, the foundational tools continue to apply, and we continue to find cracks and holes in the that you got to fill in the foundation always. I think our next phase is really using obviously a lot of discussion in the world about digital and how computers can help you do things. I plug those into places where it's a really difficult piece of waste to get rid of. And I think computers do a wonderful job at quickly getting past, and automation's the same way. And so we're really looking at using digital as a methodology to break down some of the friction that's in the world around us. That's really what it does well. You can also, if you think about it, our entire digital team runs in a lean fashion. They use the tools of Agile, which is a great lean process. It's very similar to any of the lean events it's like a 2-week Kaizen instead of a 1-week Kaizen, with a specific goal that you're trying to achieve and bite-sized chunks of improvement. And it's so good. I mean, I will tell you, Agile's so good. We use it outside of digital. We use it in marketing. We use it in sales. It's a wonderful way of operating. And when a team gets into that rhythm, it's very cross-functional, very action-oriented, very problem-solving driven. That's the future way of working for us, and we've already got a big chunk of the organization operating that way. So that's how we can continue to develop out as a company that's constantly changing and learning.
Yeah, sort of a distinction. A lot of times people say things like lean and agile can't coexist, but what you just demonstrated that there's a part of our business where a different continuous improvement approach helps us be more effective, and it can coexist with the MasterBrand way. And for that matter, we make it part of the MasterBrand way.
No, it's like you guys bring a great library of tools to us, but we morph them and it becomes our own. And that's how it works. And we're at that stage now where we have our own library of tools that we're happy to share with you too, Damon, if you
in an industry that is cyclical, where you have not only big macro changes in demand, but then you have seasonality and housing starts certain times of year. How do you flex up and down labor and business demands? This is a question from one of the participants.
Yeah, there's always a limit. I think the goal is to try to make variable whatever you possibly can. That's the first step. And then once, obviously, at some point, if you're manufacturing, you have a fixed cost that you can't get rid of. The lean helps you see your potential capacity. That's the first thing. If you've really done your work, you know what your capacity is, and you can use tools like standard work to flex up and down. You're changing the tack time, you go back to the Yamazumi chart and you readjust. At a certain point, obviously, you run into constraints, and so I'm always thinking about what's the next leg of constraints that we might face. If you can operate your plant network as a single layer of capacity, those constraints become spread out. If you can't, then you got to deal with the constraints in a small way. So it's really cyclical manufacturing is a constraint management problem, and then you have to have the tools underneath to make sure those constraints are as minimal as possible. But lean really does provide you with that. You should be able to tell this is the pace every single one of these factories should run in a given day. Because manufacturing is there's a metronome. There's a reason that's the analogy you use when you're doing standard work, is if the plant runs at the right pace, you're going to make money. If it doesn't, you're going to lose money. And so you've got to constantly be looking at that. And I try to spread, if I can make that broader, then I can minimize the constraints. That's simply in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it.
That's great. Well, Dave, that was a really quick hour. It went very fast. We'll have to do a 2.0 version of this. Want to thank you for your service. It was Veterans Day this month, so I really appreciate your background, your history with the Navy. And thank you for today's interview. It was very insightful, and I learned a lot, and hope to continue the conversation with you.
Great. Well, I appreciate it, Damon. Really enjoyed it, and anytime, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone. I know that's probably going to be stuck on tape now, but enjoy the holiday week, and we'll see you soon.
All right, take care. For those on the webinar, this will be recorded, and this will be emailed to you about a day after the conclusion of the webinar. So you'll be able to watch this webinar at your own leisure or forward this to other folks inside your organization. Thank you all for participating, and thank you again, Dave. And as you said, have a great holiday and the rest of your week. Bye now.